When I first created this piece, my idea was to see if I could achieve an atmospheric piece of artwork without labouring on it for days. I love to create all the time and have a million ideas about what's next, so if something starts taking too long, I'm anxious about getting on to the next piece. I love adding skills and also love supplies and tools, and I recently bought an airbrush and compressor. This video isn't about how an airbrush works or a step-by-step approach, but instead it's to show you that there are really fast ways for you to achieve different looks to your artwork and shortcuts to get there. I covered the background a dark charcoal, almost black, using acrylic paint and a foam brush. I could have sprayed it on with the airbrush, but it would have taken a long time, so I used a foam brush to eliminate any brush lines, and when dry added a horizon line with white. When white goes on with an airbrush, it's such a fine mist that it goes on light grey, but it will get white if you just keep on spraying. To get the bokeh look, I'm using a stencil. I've masked off some of the holes so they don't get sprayed on there by mistake with any overspray. The best way to work with an airbrush is to look at the reference, and whatever is in the very far background, those areas will go in first, and then the other layers get added on top of those. I'm using acrylic paint, so any dark and light colours can be added at any time, and this is true whenever there's acrylic paint. The airbrush allows me to achieve a more transparent look if I want, or a more opaque one, so that's really cool. Also, if anything goes wrong or I just don't like it, I can start all over again, so it's a fast and fun way to create a scene. I think that this took me a couple of hours all in all. To get a misty, foggy effect, you just spray at a distance, and if you want super clear lines, you just use the airbrush closer to your artwork. Adding colours is really easy, and you don't need more than one airbrush. I'm using a gravity feed airbrush, which means you add paint to the cup in the top of the airbrush. You keep adding colours, or if you want to change colours completely, you empty out the cup. You can mix colours as you go by adding drops of paint in the cup and then mixing it with an old brush. It's an extremely fun way to learn about how colours mix, but you can achieve this look with very few paint colours and very little mixing, quite honestly. I'll show you a quick and foolproof process to change colours quickly and without mess in my next video, but I want you to know you do not need to be an airbrush pro by any means, and I'm certainly not. I didn't cover my walls or wear an apron. I probably should have. So contrary to popular belief, airbrushing is not really very messy at all, so notice how clean the work area is on the easel. To get a realistic bokeh effect, I used more or less the same size circle hole throughout, and for a reflection the best method to use is simple vertical strokes and then later on horizontal strokes. You can really play around with an airbrush. I messed up the reflection at first, but I fixed it by just adding more background colour and sorted it all out, so there's nothing to really worry about. The beauty of bokeh is in the out of focus effect, so if you want to add more colour to the circle, you don't have to be exact, and it looks better if you don't line things up correctly with your lines anyway. Acrylic paint dries super fast, so I took the masking tape off and got to work on the details of the drawing. I created some very light strokes with coloured pencils. You can't achieve much more than a very transparent look with the coloured pencils, as it is a dark background, but you can get a semblance of reflections and some details. You just can't achieve anything really opaque with them. I rubbed some of the pencil in with my fingers, and it felt like drawing chalk on a blackboard, and so it occurred to me that this look could most likely be achieved with soft pastels or pastel pencils. I just used about 4 coloured pencils. I used a couple of peaches, a pink and a red, but I wasn't exact about the colours at all. There's just no need. I just grabbed what I thought would work, and I'm using very inexpensive coloured pencils, so if you want to give this a try, you don't need to buy either quality paints or pencils to achieve the same look that I did. And by the way, I will list the reference in the description box below. I would have liked to achieve a bit more vibrancy at this point, but without using acrylic paint, it wasn't really possible. And anyway, this was just a quick experiment, but I quite like the softer look using coloured pencils in hindsight anyway. The white pencil wasn't quite opaque enough, as most coloured pencils aren't, so I used that, but I also used a General's 558 white charcoal pencil. That's the one with the darker outside, and that went on super bright for some of the highlights. They were a bit too bright, so I just dulled them down with my fingers and blended them in. I don't usually like to use my fingers in artwork, but it was okay in this instance. I intensified some of the colours in the bokeh circles and in the reflections. But in truth, there really wasn't a whole lot to do because all of the work was done with the airbrush and the background was just really simple and dark. I paid attention to the reference, but I also simplified it just to give the look of night lights glistening on the water. The surface I used isn't anything fancy. I just had some mixed media paper lying around, so I taped it off and got the background painted on it. It was a thicker paper, so it didn't buckle. I did apply quite a bit of background before I started, so I let it dry completely, but you don't need a hairdryer, it'll dry fast enough. I cut my artwork out a bit bigger than the size I need for framing. I wanted an 8 by 10 inch image, so I cut another ½ inch around, allowing a ¼ inch border all the way around so that I could move it around without getting paint on my hands, and also look good in my portfolio with the cleaner edges if I don't get around to framing anytime soon. There did come a point in my coloured pencil work where I couldn't add any more layers. The acrylic surface just wouldn't allow it, but by this time I was more or less finished with the look that I wanted to achieve. It's not a sanded surface, just acrylic paint on thick surface, so there was a limit to the available tooth to work on. It made me less perfectionist and made me finish earlier than I would have if I'd used another surface, so that was great because deliberating over artwork towards the very end and right after is definitely something a lot of us artists do. I was quite happy with it. I didn't have to overthink anything, and now I'm able to get excited about the next artwork that I want to create. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed watching it, so I look forward to seeing you in the very next video.